Hi, I'm Joseph McNulty, author of the book A Sick Prejudice, Overcoming Our Primal Fears and Stereotypes of Someone with a Serious Illness. I wrote the book to give us all an understanding of a phenomenon that I identified where people can, when they get into an illness situation, start to feel that the situation is filled with burden. They have feelings of dread, catastrophe, of fear, and they can start to actually avoid the illness situation because it feels like something may happen to them that is negative. So I go into the book in detail. I won't talk about that here, but will answer a question that often comes up when people do get into illness situations, and that'll be the first part of a video series that I'm beginning today. The background, though, that I have in this, just so you know, I'll mention that before getting into the question, is that my wife had cancer for about 12 years. I have had cancer for about 6 years. I'm doing very well and just take some maintenance medications and things are very stable. So I've been fortunate. Also in my background, had a mother who had breast cancer in the 60s, who had lymphoma in the 80s, and then in the 2000s she got Alzheimer's, but lived to be 86 very happily and quite healthy until she passed away. Also had a father who had Parkinson's for quite a number of years, and that's a tough one. Today I'm going to jump right into answering a question which comes up, and that is, how do you respond, what do you say to someone near to you that is just diagnosed, just got a serious illness? They have heard that they've got cancer or heart disease or ALS or any number of chronic serious conditions that are out there. I think that the first point that I would want to make, and I'll go through this pretty quickly today, is not to make too big of a deal of that conversation that you're going to have with them, whether it's meeting in person, which hopefully is the case, or a phone call if you can't meet them in person. You will just want to give it a little bit of thought. We'll talk about some things here. There are some other tools and resources online that you can consider that I'll talk about, but really I see people out there making much too big of a deal of that conversation and often avoiding it because of some of this sick prejudice kinds of exaggerated fears and emotions that we all get that can really make the situation negative instead of it being a positive opportunity for us, the helpers, and for the sick person as well. I think the second important point is to have a conversation that is natural for you, to not have something that is scripted as to what to say. So in this video I'm going to be suggesting that you not get into specific things to say, planned statements, for a variety of reasons. One is that those kinds of things can focus your mind on what to say rather than being in the conversation itself, and that's the most important place for you to be, is right there with the person, talking to them about what they're feeling, about what they are talking about, and not disconnected and disjointed, bringing in some overarching statement or something you planned, which I think most people will notice as a sick person that is happening, and that you're really there now in this conversation, talking to them as this well person talking to a sick person, needing planned statements and things, and that really can communicate to someone who's sick that, wow, this is different, that already people around me, as this sick person speaking, are changing and starting to talk to me differently and starting to behave differently. Another big reason is that everybody is different. Clearly, certain things that might help one person who's a mother of 5 children and 50 years old may not help a teenager who is 15 years old, or someone who is from a certain country like Africa, and another country perhaps like the United States or like Russia, and just have different cultural aspects to their lives. So many other kinds of differences can exist, of course, and that's why I don't suggest saying some specific things, because they can not necessarily fit what the person is who you're talking to. And those specific things are things that can come from online and come from books, those types of things. Things that you think of as you're talking and as you know the person are perfectly fine, and that's a good thing. But going up and researching what to say in general, I think is going to take you out of the moment. And that's so important. We don't want artificial conversations. We don't want you to feel ingenuine. We don't want to reinforce sick prejudices they may already have, where people are starting to talk to them as a person with a disease or as a person who is sick, but rather talking about this illness they have and maintaining the relationship that was there before. Let's see, the first thing that is crucial then, keeping those two in mind, of not making too much of the conversation and of not going out and necessarily reading planned statements that you intend to say, is just to first sit quietly yourself and get in touch with how you're feeling. So it's crucial that you understand where you are in this illness news that has come about, and to not go out with a mind that into the conversation, a mind that really isn't where you want to be or where is best for your friend or family member. So the focus here is on being in a state of mind that is going to serve you and your sick loved one the best. And again, not about these particular statements. To get to that state of mind, you first have to understand the state of mind you're in now. And to do that, sit quietly, 20 minutes, whatever, and understand, what are you feeling? What are you feeling? Worry? Probably. Are you feeling fearful that something dreadful could happen to them, or that they could die? Are you feeling that this whole thing could be a great burden and you've already got a lot going on and the sick one already has a lot going on? These are just a sample of very natural things that we can all feel. But going into a conversation about things that haven't actually happened and projecting that into the conversation, I think, is very counterproductive. So we want you and the sick one to be in the present as much as possible, because out in the future there's countless scenarios and countless terrible things that can be imagined. Right now, most likely in this moment, in this second, with that sick person, things are okay. Things are okay. Unless they're in an emergency room and having a dire situation, things should be pretty stable. So keeping that in mind, that you're understanding where your thoughts are, that you're now recognizing thoughts that you have and feelings that you have, you may want to take an opportunity to actually vent if you're feeling really scared and fearful about this thing, and just start saying to yourself in a quiet place, alone, oh my gosh, I can't believe she has gotten cancer. This is unbelievable. I'm stunned. She was so healthy. Now she's got cancer. She could die. She has to go through treatments. They could be terrible. And radiation, I've heard stories about this stuff. And now I could lose my good friend, or my sister, my mother, my brother, whatever. And this could be such a burden on the family, I don't know if I can even bear to see her wasting away and turning into a sick person who is slowly dying in pain and agony. These kinds of things we think about, and you may want to talk yourself through that so that when you get into the conversation, you've already kind of done some of that. You can be poised, and you can be present, and you can be in this moment, and not in the state of shock and despair for the future that can often accompany this kind of news. So, step 2, after understanding your thoughts, is to have your conversation. And again, as I said, ideally do that in person. And this is a time for doing a lot of listening. We, as helpers, may want to talk, we may want to reassure, we may want to do a lot of different things, but really catch yourself and make sure that you are listening a lot, that you're also in this kind of a state of mind, you're keeping things judgment-free. So you may think of how you might react to this news and to what's happening and to the appointments that are going to be needed and your life, but it may be different for this other person. Probably is. So keep the judgments out for now. Keep it also very natural as a conversation, a comfortable conversation used to be. So conversations can change as someone gets sick, and we can again start to talk to them as though they are a disease more than the person, and that's unfortunate. So some part of them does have this one problem, but the rest of them is all the same. It's all the same as it was previously. So keep it natural, keep judgments out of it, listen a lot, and I think praise them as you're talking, and not overwhelmingly, but genuinely they're probably stretching themselves emotionally and what they need to do and what they are doing, and I think praise always helps reinforce what a person is trying to accomplish. Also, it's important, I think, to enable them to feel good in the situation, that you tell them and talk to them about just staying in the moment, keeping their perspective in this time for today, and we'll talk a little further about this in a moment, but keeping the idea of logistics and of planning, of how things are going to happen later in the conversation. And we'll talk more about that. But these are some of the top level things that are important, I think, to keep a conversation kind of flowing and natural, which is so important for them to feel like they're heard, that you're there, you're connected with them, you two are communicating and not talking about two different things often. Step 3 is to acknowledge how they feel. So as they're talking, you'll notice that they are off in the future, or that they are expressing some feelings you may not have, and they may be doing all the ranting or something that you might have done in private yourself. They may be talking about how this could possibly happen and how dreadful it is and how unfair it is, etc., and really venting some emotions. They may not. They may not get into that at all, but often people do. And so it's important to acknowledge how they feel, not necessarily saying what you're saying is true, but just it's understandable, to feel that way. And I understand what you're saying. It's an understandable kind of reaction, and these kinds of things that can validate their feelings about it, because their feelings are their feelings, and to that extent they are true. What they're saying may be off in the future, may never happen, which is often the case, and so may in fact not be true statements, but their feelings about why they're saying these things are true. So after acknowledging, step 4, which is very important, is to gently keep them in this present moment. I've talked about that a couple times here, but I'll give it some more detail now. Clearly, we all engage in what-if statements all the time, but with illness, it gets particularly difficult and troublesome for the situation, because there's seemingly so much at stake, life and death, and pain, and getting things accomplished or not. It seems like the stakes are very high, and they can be in some cases. So it's important that one stay in the moment, though. I toiled with this a lot, with my wife's illness and then with my own. And that was something that I did. I went online and I researched all kinds of statistics and all kinds of stories and all kinds of information, and doctors was way kind of over the top. So my form of a sick prejudice is one in which we can overcompensate, that these exaggerated emotions cause us to dive in and really try to fix this whole situation fast. And that's something that I did. And it simply brought a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety to myself and to the family. By trying to plan for different scenarios, losing my job, having to take care of kids if my wife passed away, how insurance, medical insurance, would cover things, or would it, etc., etc. The side effects in some of my own illness, things that happen very little or not at all. So there's so many things that one can go into when we start future thinking and being out there. And the future is something we really can't cope with right now. We really can cope with the present moment, and when the time is right, we can plan for the future and some things that we can see are going to happen. I'll talk more about that. But to actually hit all the scenarios that can happen, obviously, don't work out, and really in illness, as I said, bring about a lot of stress. There's a lot of overwhelming kinds of things that come up when we have illnesses and when we are helpers in illness situations. Those things, again, create this higher level of stress. And the reason that I talk about not planning at the same time as kind of having an initial conversation about how one feels and how the sick person is responding to things. I think what happens is planning inevitably, of course, talks about the future and what do we do to get certain chores done and to get the sick one to appointments and to plan for a surgery or plan for treatments, etc. And where we really want the sick one in evaluating their illness, in kind of thinking high level about what's happened to their lives, is in the present moment. So what's happened to their lives may only be that they've been diagnosed. They now have some news. They may still be feeling okay. They may now understand why they're not feeling okay, but they're probably sitting on a chair and things are pretty stable right now. So we don't want to mix now, where things are pretty good, with planning for the future and all the different logistics, because then it naturally brings in this idea of what could happen to them in the future. And really want to keep what can happen to them out of this for the most part, and just in the moment, because we don't know what's going to happen to them. They don't know. how they respond to different treatments, how they do in a surgery, what happens with their illness. I discuss at more length in the book A Sick Prejudice. But since we don't know, we don't want to cloud the whole environment with speculation on these big lofty subjects. So step 5 is to express some reasonable confidence and optimism. So you've had your conversation, you're talking. Now I think it is very reasonable, based on research, to choose to focus on good outcomes, on for them to believe in things that are within the possibility of occurring within their illness situation, and to focus on those. So, for example, that treatments and surgeries go well, that things will get done around the house and the yard, that their job will work out, that their pain will be manageable, that they will recover on time or better. So this isn't unrealistic thinking. This is choosing to look at options and opportunities that can happen in any situation that are positive ones instead of negative. I think it's better to expect a great outcome and be disappointed if it doesn't happen fully, rather than prepare for the worst and prove ourselves right. So the reason for this is we have this placebo effect, which you've probably heard of course. It is where we believe that we've taken something, or something has been done to us that is going to make us feel better. This is a very strong effect. There is no clinical study, no pharmaceutical drug study that does not account for the placebo effect and control it out of the tests. That's because the placebo effect can be so high. The proportion of people that have the placebo effect can range from 15 to 90%. There's all kinds of studies out there and all kinds of information about this. In the case of trials and drug tests, they want to take out people who are feeling better because of their own thoughts that something good is happening to them, and instead look at just what this particular drug or procedure is doing to make them better. And the reason this is important for this conversation is because they can have, the sick ones, some very real, tangible benefits by believing that things are going to go well. And in fact, there are, as you look at the different things that can happen, there's always ways that it can turn out that are better, beneficial, positive, and those are ones to look at. This will pull them towards those kinds of outcomes. It's not going to, cure cancer or reverse heart disease or these kinds of things, according to most studies out there, of course. But it can reduce the side effects. It can make people feel much better so that they can tolerate treatments and drugs better, so that they eat more, so that they sleep better, making them stronger, healthier through this process, and other kinds of benefits which can have a real impact on their healing outcome. So certainly I think bring out some positive things. It's not a Pollyanna kind of thing where unrealistically everything is going to be perfect, but as we look at situations, how's this radiation treatment going to go, or how's the surgery going to go, or what's going to happen, it can go well, and the pain can be manageable, and the surgery can be a full success. No question that is a possibility, and therefore you can keep them focused on that. So step 6 is to tell them that you want to help. So they're going to be feeling overwhelmed, and this is a real aspect of a sick prejudice that comes up, where people can actually scare themselves out of helping someone who they really do care about. They can feel it's going to be such a burden, or that somehow they're not going to be able to handle it emotionally, or that it could financially be costly to them, or that they could jeopardize their job, or that they have all kinds of excuses that can come up, but in fact they are really feeling some, what I have found in research to be some very primitive types of emotions that have evolved over a long period in our evolution, combined with the things that we've seen on TV, medical dramas. We might have watched hundreds or even thousands of medical drama scenes that are very dramatic. We might have read some statistics in the past, or even about this current illness, that have frightened us or made it appear to be a pessimistic situation. We may have had some relatives in the past that were also sick and had a difficult time, and we just project that onto this situation. Because of those things, it can be natural for us to, as some people, to avoid wanting to get involved too much. It can also be natural for the sick one who has the same kinds of sick prejudice emotions to tend to think that they're going to be a burden, to tend to put off statements where people say they'd like to help because they don't want to be a burden, and because they feel like people don't really want to help, which is the way the sick one might have felt in the past regarding these situations. In fact, helping, I talk about this quite a bit in the book, is a very warming and strengthening and fulfilling process for the helpers and for the sick one. It's a very natural thing that we would have done throughout our evolution. Just naturally in our small family level groups, we would have stopped and helped an older one get something, or a sick injured person to do something, or to make them some food along with our other food. And just throughout our days, over thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years, we would have adjusted easily and done this, and would have been a natural part of our lives. So that can be lost, though, in some of this kind of situation where we can end up frightened and end up fearful, and like a burden can be out there. So in telling them specifically you want to help, and I would say here's what I'd like to do. It's important that you actually try to do what you would like to do, so that you feel good about the help you're providing and being able to stick with it. So better to help with yard work and feel good about doing that because you love gardening and you love being with the plants and the dirt, than to offer to take kids to school each day, or something that you don't feel as good about doing. So that's important. And then to say, listen, I'd like to help with the yard work to start. I can see, some things are overgrown now. I'm just going to come in. What day would be good? I'm thinking Wednesday, and we'll just start doing some pruning and getting rid of some of this stuff. Or it may be that you can help with the dishes, or that you can help with laundry, or whatever it might be. You can come in, you can take these things, and it's once or twice a week, once or twice a month. But to make it very clear, you want to help, you're going to help. I talk in the book about folks who are pretty adamant about not wanting help. And so for the moment, we're just going to stay with that they do need some help, and that they are really being polite to initially refuse help. So, in my case, the help that I needed was conversations. So my wife and I were keeping up with things around the house pretty well, and keeping up with the yard, and she was getting herself to appointments, and and taking care of our kids. The issue that I ran into was that this situation of her being seriously ill was kind of out there all the time, and I was thinking about that and needed, intermittently to talk to someone about how she's doing and about how I'm doing in this situation. It kind of goes on and on and on. So there's all different kinds of help that can be done. I won't list them here. There's a lot of ideas in my book. So take a look at that if you want to really get some broad ideas and get into a space in your own mind where you're looking for some good ways to be in this situation and feel positive about that. Step 7 then is, you've told them you want to help, you've told them that there's some good outcomes that can come from this and to focus on those things. And now some basic kinds of things you can say without scripting or anything. Things that are natural for you is that you care for them or that you love them, that it's not their fault that this illness happened. A lot of people think that somehow they caused it. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. So even if the person's a smoker and they got lung cancer, and we would say they caused this is something they did. Why they started smoking in the first place, may not be their fault, of course. They may have had parents that smoked, or they may have been affected by the media out there and the availability of cigarettes and the coolness of ads and other friends who smoked and been impressionable, etc., etc. So the reasons we do things are complicated and can go back a long ways into our lives. So really, in my humble opinion, we're not at fault, even though we may have some habits that could have caused our illness. We're ourselves, and we grew up in a certain way and in a certain environment, in a certain family at a certain time. And so it's important that people don't feel like they have, possibly made themselves sick or, destroyed their future in some regards. It's important that they are really focused on these good outcomes and not in kind of a victim type of mentality or a idea where they're just not feeling good about themselves and have everything moving forward so that they are feeling like this is going to work through and is just another stage in their life and another learning opportunity. So you can tell them, it's okay to be sick. So a lot of people really think that they have failed if they got sick, that it's not okay, that they have let everybody down, they let themselves down, and they can feel like they have been let down by God, that they are kind of abandoned, because that's what can often happen to sick people in our society and is a part of this sick prejudice that I talk about, a big part. So it's okay to be sick, and that's something that my mother always reinforced in me just when I would have a virus or strep throat or something like that. And it took a while for me to understand that, but as I did, it was very helpful for me and very helpful for my wife to say, okay, this is something that happened, it's okay, all kinds of things happen to us. We get in car accidents, we get fired from jobs or get laid off, we have losses in our lives, our family members may pass away, we have financial losses, things come up, and particularly for illnesses, important to just say, okay, this has happened and we're moving forward. in the best way that we know how, and we're keeping ourselves optimistic on the outcomes that we're looking for. Also, you can tell them, in addition to helping, that it's okay, that you care, that you love them, that you'll see them regularly or talk to them on the phone regularly. So when someone gets sick, it's difficult because they can start to get disconnected. People will start to disconnect from them. And that's a part of this sick prejudice that I talk about more at length in a book. In my book, the friends that they have can start calling less and texting less and drifting away. The family members can do the same thing. And the sick person can even come to believe that this is a natural way it should be. They can even withdraw from social situations. They can even become somewhat less communicative, thinking that they're supposed to be sidelined, they're supposed to be out of people's thoughts because it's negative to be thinking about someone sick, and who wants to think about that? So even the sick one can kind of pull away from their attachment with people. So by saying that you're going to see them on some regular basis, let's say it's once a week, let's say it's every day, depending on who it is and if you live close, or it's once or twice a month, if there's a number of other friends and family involved that are also seeing them, you're making it clear that you're connected, that you're going to be at least seeing them that often, and then you can call them. So one of the things that happens is that we don't necessarily want to hear that something bad has come up. And so no news is good news, and when someone's sick, things can happen and nobody calls and nobody's checking in. That lets them kind of realize that, wow, they're in this alone. They're going to have to kind of get through this. And this would happen in, my wife's illness. She would have some extraordinary pain and difficulty, and people would check in weekly, which was great, but things would be going on more often than that. And my impression was they didn't necessarily want to know about those things because it was, in their mind, a very negative thing and would kind of bring them down. So the conversations that happened weekly, which were very good, were kind of high level. My wife would keep them kind of sugar-coated and not too difficult for those folks. But it would have been much better if she could have really talked honestly, if those folks could have been in a place in their mind where they're not brought down by these things, but that it's facts that are happening out there, and that we do what we can around these things, but we know what's happening. And that's really important for someone who is sick and maybe suffering in a certain time period, to know that people know about that and that they are aware of it. So for us as helpers, it's important that we are able to understand these kinds of things, to hear these kinds of things, to not fall apart about these things, but that they're something that is happening now, that's passing through time, and the sick person is going through this phase, and that we are conscious of it, but we are not taking it to an extreme, which we tend to do with illness. So, again, all this around being there for them on some regular basis, checking in with them, ensuring that they know they can contact you, and having the confidence, for us and you as a helper, that you're going to be able to handle situations as they come up, to not have unwarranted fear that if you're involved somehow you can get pulled in too much. I talk about that at length in the book. So take a look at that if that's something that's on your mind. So shifting gears now to some things that I would be cautious about saying. We talked about some things, some ideas that you can communicate, a few specific things to talk about. There's many more online. There are lists that you'll see out there, plenty of lists of what to say and specific things not to say. So again, don't know if those will be helpful for you, but you can look at those in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and get a good idea of some things that you might have been thinking about saying that may not be appropriate for this person. Things that like commenting on their looks. This is one that I saw on one of those lists, and that can be problematic for people when they're sick. And there's numerous other things, kind of smaller tactical things you could say that can come up. I'm going to focus on just these bigger things for this video. Some things to be cautious about saying are, in general, expressing sorrow, tragedy, unfairness, and even shock. So the reason that I think we want to just gloss over this when it comes up in a conversation is that, as I said before, things do happen. So all kinds of things happen. So it isn't unfair that this is happening. We get car accidents, we get divorces, we get all kinds of things, and they just happen. Natural disasters. So shock, unfairness, really, if we think about it, isn't something that we should communicate a lot, because it tends to reinforce that this is a tragic, terrible situation. And I don't recommend framing the illness in that way. So that then sets off all kinds of stereotypes, of sick prejudice types of thinking, all kinds of negative thinking, which are kind of the opposite of the placebo. So we have something called a nocebo effect. It's actually called that. And in that, when we believe that something is hurting us, even though it's not, we can make ourselves sicker. We can give ourselves symptoms that we would never otherwise have, serious symptoms, make ourselves weaker, and get into a spiral of self-fulfilling prophecies about something, in this case an illness, that can lead to much worse healing outcomes. So to frame this as a tragedy, as a catastrophe, as the person has got one foot in the grave, they are in dire trouble, that they may well be dying from this, is going to reinforce those kinds of thoughts, which can ultimately make the symptoms of the illness worse, and their own response to it more negative, obviously, which can make them sadder, eating less, having trouble sleeping, having trouble getting through treatments, more sensitive to pain than they would be otherwise. So really, I think that there's an expectation, unfortunately, in our society that we say, I'm sorry, and that you're not feeling well, but to really kind of gloss through that and get into how they're feeling, not characterize it right off the bat as, oh my God, I'm so sorry, that's terrible. So that's a classic response that people have, and over the many years I would hear this and I would think, okay, they're talking about how they would respond. They really haven't had much of this in their life. They don't really know yet that lots of good comes from this, that it's just another avenue of our life where we begin to understand ourselves and understand our world and people and the value of life in a different way. So all kinds of good can come out of this, and to instantly frame it that way, the very first thing that's said, it's tragic, I'm so sorry, oh my God, is really going to scare that initial sick person, when we really want them to feel comfortable, when we don't want to project anything about the future out there, and when they may have a very good growth opportunity, and as I did. So certainly in my illness was in many ways one of the best things that have ever happened to me. I've done things and changed my life in ways that I wouldn't have otherwise, and been able to see the world and been able to provide information like this to help people that I wouldn't otherwise, to take up new hobbies, new interests, and just feel better about myself and my family and about people than I would otherwise. Lots more things I talk about in the book about this, so I won't spend time on it now. So I think that a second thing to avoid saying, besides expressing sorrow and tragedy and unfairness and shock, is the general idea of asking about a prognosis. So a prognosis is basically, what are the chances someone's going to survive from this, and how long are they going to survive if they do? There's a lot of problems with this. First is, we really don't want to take people out into the future and to think about their survival. It may of course be in their minds, but to instantly say, well, what have you heard about how long you're going to live? Is again framing this in a way that can well be pessimistic. Because talking about any survival, whether you're only going to live to be 60 or 70 or 80 or 90, actually is pessimistic. You've put a cap on your life. So we don't want to cap someone's life, especially when we don't know how long they're going to live. There's a second big issue with this, which is that the statistics that these kinds of survival statistics rely on, and the way in which they're generated and compounded and collected, have some flaws and some issues that people don't understand, and therefore a prognosis may well be inaccurate, and most of the time will be, I will say, as well as survival statistics. Just very quickly, I'll mention that's because there's really 4 or 5 reasons, but quickly, they're based on people who may be very different than the individual sick person that is in front of you. So they are based on people who may be a different nationality, a different gender, a completely different person, who went to different doctors, who had different medications, who was initially treated many years ago when they got sick and has finally died, who may have smoked their whole life and drank their whole life, all kinds of things. It's everybody. So we don't have a statistic on this one person in front of us. Secondly, it's usually based on people who are older, of course, who tend to get illnesses, and so that can be a unnecessarily pessimistic thing for someone who is younger than the average, like I was. So to suggest how long someone who's 50 is going to live with this illness, when that average is based on people who are 70 or 75, is not realistic. And it's not going to be true in most cases. So additionally, these statistics are based on people who die from any reason. So there's a couple different types of survival statistics, but generally it's, here's a person who has heart disease, here's when it was diagnosed, here's when they died. And so what happens is, many people are 70 when they get heart disease. They might have died anyway when they were 78, and they died when they were 76 or even 78. But they only lived 6 or 8 years. So when we apply that to everyone else, that's kind of an improper use of statistics, because we've got people dying of other causes. It may well not have anything to do with their heart disease. So some statistics are that way, some are not, and they take that out of it. But many are. So there's more reasons than that, but to be very cautious about it. And these kinds of prognoses and survival statistics can really kick in this nocebo effect and really tell someone, wow, you know, the average person with this is only living 4 years. I'm done. You know, I got to start planning for, you know, being gone in 4 years. But as we look at that much more closely, we can see that that's not true, that those people that died didn't have the newest drugs and the newest surgeries, and that we don't have you know, life expectancy on the people today that are getting treated with these things that we've made geometric progress in over the last 5 years, even across the board in many types of illnesses. So we just don't know what's going to happen to this individual person. We haven't tested these specific drugs perhaps and techniques, etc., etc. So that whole prognosis area is something both my wife and I just avoided. We didn't even ask. We didn't. It was totally irrelevant. Fortunately, we knew that from the beginning, that we would, you know, not get kind of sucked into that and start thinking about that. So I'm glad for that. And of course, she, you know, lived almost 12 years. I'm doing exceedingly well, and I don't know what the statistics are, but they're probably not as good as I'm doing for some of the reasons that I mentioned. So I think that, you know, as an example, because I really can't say too much on this, I had a coworker come to me, and first thing he said when I was telling my coworkers that I had been sick was that he asked, well, what's the prognosis? And I said, I don't know. You know, I didn't get a prognosis. It's not going to be accurate. I don't really need it. I am going to just do what I'm supposed to do in this regard. I'm going to be thinking positive about it. And I know inside that it's going to work out well. You know, for him, I think that he was looking for something he could tell friends, he could tell family. Oh my gosh, Joe McNulty has got cancer. The prognosis is boom. And it's just a kind of almost like a godly thing to be talking about and expressing to friends and family. And in this American culture of ours, the prognosis has just become a standard, if you will. And I think that's very unfortunate. I also think that it has, in recent years, just from my observation, taken on some new dimensions where doctors are much more balanced in how they present a prognosis. And they account for many of these kinds of things I've talked about and say, you know, you may be completely different. We don't know what will happen with you. These are just some averages out there, blah, 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 blah. So, I think, you know, this coworker was really looking for some stories and responding to the way that illness had been presented to him throughout TV shows and perhaps, you know, somewhere else in his life. But don't let that cloud your judgment and your responses to things. So another thing that I think relates to this that is important to be cautious about saying is to make comparisons to other people. So I think it's very easy for us to say that so-and-so is doing really well, they've got breast cancer, they've had a mastectomy, and they're doing fine. And that can be uplifting, and it can be a positive influence on someone who's just being diagnosed with breast cancer. The problem is that it then opens up to comparisons of people who aren't doing well. So if you're comparing to people, then what about the ones that got breast cancer, the mastectomy didn't work, they went to stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and they died. So you open the conversation and the thinking up to that as well. And again, we just can't compare to other people. We are very different than other people. So even though there may be some positive things happening out there, I suggest just having the person stick with themselves, having their own self-confidence, their own optimism in what they know are the opportunities for things to work out well, aside from what may have happened to someone else that's good or that's not good or something. Really, I would keep them focused on themselves. I think that also these people who do well, at some point they may not, and they may be back in treatment or whatever. And so again, if the sick one is hinged, their kind of optimism and their positive outlook and their hopes on this person who has done well, and that person then gets sick again, it's like, oh, well, that's what's going to happen to me because I've been using them as a model, and now that model got sick and may have even died. So, now what do I do and what do I think? I think that, in addition to, some of these things, to general categories of what not to say, like I've talked about, again, you can check some online lists. I did find some kind of creative things, most of which I would not be saying anyway to somebody, but someone out there and watching this video may well say some of these things, and their families may talk about things in these ways. So I would say feel free, if you want, to scan some of these kind of quick lists of what to say to someone when they're sick, and see if you can take away something from that. Lastly, as I close up here, I think that there will be other conversations, and so it's important that you don't have to hinge everything on this one. It may be a first one, but it's just laying a little bit of groundwork. There will be the next one and the next one and the next one. Things will change with the sick one. Their own thinking will change about it. They'll go through the stages of an illness, of how we think about it, which you can find out more about online and a little bit in my book as well. Your thinking will change. Their condition may change. Things will come together in the planning of how their care will be handled and the logistics around their home and that type of thing. So really, just a first conversation to just connect with them, to avoid a few things, to express some confidence and some optimism, and let them know you care for them, let them know that you are want to help, and how often that may be for you. Whatever it is, to just kind of jump in there and start that. I think that, again, whenever you have these conversations, don't make too much of them. Most important is to keep that friendly kind of relationship that you had, and maybe the banter that you had, and the joking and the things in there, and make sure that in your state of mind that the person's meaning to you hasn't changed fundamentally because they're now sick. That they're still your brother that they always were, or your father, or your wife, or whatever, and to just interact, enjoy the time talking with them as much as you can. Again, my book is Sick Prejudice. It's out there on Amazon, Kindle, Kobo, iBooks, Google Play. Visit josephmcnulty.com. There's more there about my own background and the book itself. Feel free to send any questions or comments from the contact page on josephmcnulty.com. And I thank you so much for joining me today. Look for additional videos coming up about other questions. Thank you.